When I did episode 139, in response to questions by Mr. Phineas and Caleb van der Wolf, I was well aware that there was a controversy about whether the moon landings happened or not. I knew that much of the controversy concerned radiation in the Van Allen belts and the validity of the moon photos. I had no idea that we had followers who were absolutely confident that the moon landings were a hoax. It's been a great pleasure interacting with you and trying to find the reasons for your certainty. One pleasant surprise was to find that most looked to Scripture as the final authority. I asked what scriptures in particular point to the moon landing being a hoax. Several people pointed to the establishment's propagating evolution and its vast timescale as a reason why we can't believe anything the authorities tell us. It's very obvious why the establishment thrusts evolution and its vast ages of time down our throats. It's an open and deliberate denial of the creation and its creator. None of us should believe such obvious deception. The enlightened establishment wants to deify man, to make man the highest authority in the universe. Their humanist manifesto tells us humanists believe that the responsibility for our lives and the kind of world in which we live is ours and ours alone. And right at the start, what was Satan's original attack? Eat the forbidden fruit. Then you will be as gods, knowing good and evil. You can do anything you want by your own power. You are the highest power. When you are God, you can do anything. One can see why the establishment's promotion of man's trip to the moon should be treated with caution. But it is utterly different from evolution. The creation account shows us immediately that evolution is false. But I can't think of any scripture which tells us anything about man going to the moon. It doesn't even seem to have much to do with man deciding for himself what is good and what is evil. It only seems to concern whether people were telling the truth about some achievement, which seems to have very little to do with anything in the Bible. So, if we really want to know, we'll have to look at as much evidence as we can and try to come to a decision. Some have said, in the end times there will be nothing but lies, so we shouldn't believe anything we are being told. One comment seems to substantiate that idea with, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God." But this scripture tells us that some things must happen before the stage of lies only is reached. And as far as I know, that man of sin has not yet been revealed, and there is, as yet, no temple for him to proudly sit in. As far as I can see, we are not at the stage where we can be sure that everything we are being told is a lie. We are still in the stage where Paul tells us to prove all things, hold fast that which is good. We can't assume everything we are told is a lie. We must do our best to prove whether it is true or false. I got the impression that some were not happy to consider that we need to prove all things. But there was a very refreshing interaction with Husfreyan. It is possible a different set of astronauts landed on the moon but never made it back, and that only the challenging return portion was a fake. It would account for how surprisingly quiet and dejected the moon landing trio appeared in their interviews. The idea that the dejected appearance is a disproof of the story we have always been told is in the video we looked at in the last episode. The video most of the confident landing doubters seem to rely on, and which Husfreyan obviously watched at some stage. I responded, "I suspect that the returnees were quiet and looked unwell and confused because the return trip through the Van Allen belt was much more challenging from the radiation point of view than the outward part, where the rocket gave them much better shielding. The returning vehicle was much less massive, and it would not surprise me if they were suffering from radiation sickness." Husfreyan replied, "That is definitely also possible. Thank you for taking the time to respond and to give a high-quality response. I found it refreshing that someone was prepared to consider other possibilities." And another thing that struck me in the comments. Solon Kazos pointed out that many of the astronauts were Christians, and they quoted the Bible in the broadcasts from space. In 1969, a large proportion of Americans were Bible-believing Christians. It's astounding how quickly New World Order propaganda has eroded the numbers. But not only a number of the Apollo crew were Christians, but so were many of the 4,000 or so of the NASA personnel involved in the Apollo program. As far as I can tell, not one of them claimed that the landings were a fraud. And then we have Charlie Duke. He was the communications man for Apollo 11. He was the voice we heard on the home base side of the dialogues with the crew. He was also one of the lander crew with Apollo 16. Although he was not a Christian at the time, a few years later, after the landing, he gave his life to Christ. Duke has given many lectures in which he says he can't understand why there are people claiming that the landing never happened. He gives accounts of things that went wrong with Apollo. Something went wrong with every one of the missions, not just Apollo 13. Things went wrong with their computers. More than once, those 4-kilobyte computers became overloaded with information from the sensors. They shut down and restarted themselves at critical times. One of the landers was critically low on fuel. All different kinds of problems. Each time, the engineers back at NASA had to rapidly come up with fixes, sometimes just coming up with a solution in the nick of time. As Duke pointed out, if these projects were a hoax, why would anyone do so many? Why not just do one and leave it at that? Duke also points to the Moon orbiter, which took high-quality photos of all the Apollo landing sites just a few years ago. He points out on the photos of the Apollo 16 site where he landed. Things they left behind. Tracks showing where they walked. Tracks showing where they drove the moon rover. Charlie Duke is 90 years old. What would he gain by lying about all this? he has little time left before his transition into God's presence. In such a situation, I would definitely not be telling the world deliberate lies. At the start of this series on the moon, I thought the balance of probabilities was in favour of the landings. The more I've examined the evidence on both sides, the greater that probability seems to be. And I think all of us should carefully study the evidence on both sides, not just trying to justify what we already believe, but genuinely seeking the truth. Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Thank you for joining me for this episode. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe and press the bell so that you'll be notified as I release new movies. If you'd like to support this project, you're welcome to do so through Patreon. Find a link on my channel banner and in the description below.